Hello, welcome to today's lesson. My name is Miss Gasa, and this is a grade 12 English home language class. And today we are going to be talking about speeches. We're talking about speech writing today. And I know speeches can make people very nervous and they can be uncomfortable for some people. You can be like that guy who is sweating and his mouth has a funny line and you can see that his fingers are shaking. And most of us have experienced this at some point or another in our lives when we just feel like that, where we just feel overwhelmed by having to stand in front of people and speak. But in today's class, we are going to try and give you the skills and empower you so that you can end up like the guy on the other side, the confident guy, the guy in the suit, the guy who seems like he's very comfortable with making speeches. But our focus today is not just on delivery, it's on actually putting the speech on paper. Please do take note of my email address. You are welcome to contact me if you have any questions, whether it's with material related to grade 12s or related to this lesson. You are more than welcome to email me your queries. And I'd love to hear from you as well. All right, by the end of this lesson, this is what you need to have achieved or understood. You need to understand the elements that make up a great speech, and you need to be able to explain the traits of good and not so good speeches. And the last thing, that by the end of this lesson, you need to understand the foundation of writing a good speech. Right, today we are going to look at a speech by one of Africa's greatest female authors. Her name is Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi. So she delivered a speech in July 2009, and this was on TED Global. So her audience was the TED audience. And her speech is entitled The Danger of a Single Story. So I'm going to read the speech, and while I'm reading, there's a couple of things that I need you to keep in mind. Okay? I need you to keep in mind what you think makes the speech great, what are the elements, what makes it work, what you liked about it. So I want you to be actively listening, actively reading to the speech, because it'll be very helpful for you to understand what makes a great speech. Okay, so this is an example of a great speech. I'm a storyteller, and I'd like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer, and when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read. I wrote exactly the kind of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow, they ate apples, and they talked a lot about the weather. How lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I have never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books by their very nature had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequences was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So, what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle class Nigerian family. My father was a professor, my mother was an administrator, and so we had, as the norm, live in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and are all close to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your dinner. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit, and his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I heard about all I heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked me where I had learned to speak English so well and was so confused when I said Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked me if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. All right, so that is just a portion of Chimamanda's speech that she gave at a TED Talk. Okay, so I want you to think about a couple of things. Okay, so now it's your turn. I want you to mention all the elements that make Chimamanda's speech a great speech. So this is just totally your response. There are no right or wrong answers. We're just having a brainstorming session. So I just want you to have a moment just to think about it. So I'll just click back to the speech so you can just take in and remind yourself of what it was about. Okay, just for a moment. We'll go back to the very beginning and you can just quickly just browse through it. Okay, remember the title of the speech is Danger of a Single Story. And here's the first page. Just a quick glimpse just to remind yourself of what I read earlier and what makes this speech a great speech. Okay, this is the second page, just another quick glance, and you can just skim through it just to remind yourself of what we read. So you can give me your answer or you can jot down your answer about what elements make a great speech. Here's the next page. And this is the one where she tells us about her family and the story about Fidder, the houseboy from the village. Okay, and this is about her experience when she went to university, and about the roommate here. Okay, back to our question. What elements make Chimamanda's speech a great one? Okay, just think about that. Write it down if you must. Okay, think about the way she addressed the audience. Okay. Think about the examples she used. Think about the language, how she used language, how she constructed sentences. Okay? And how she shares her experiences. This is just a portion of the speech that we looked at today. So what you can do is you can find the speech online and read the rest of it. It's quite a long speech and it's very interesting, and she addresses a very important angle, that there is a danger to only looking at a story from one perspective. All right, so now let's discuss a few elements of how to write a good speech. Okay, speeches are something we will never be able to run away from. We're always giving speeches. When you have to convince your parents to get you that new Xbox, or you have to tell them that you want to go out, you prepare a speech. It might be informal, it is still a speech. And when you present for your classmates, you're still giving a speech. Adults give speech as well at work. So when you get these skills, they'll be very helpful, because it means you will become like that guy you saw in the first slide, who is confident with his hands up, and your palms won't be sweaty, and you won't be shaking, and you won't be nervous like the other guy. So we're just trying to be like the other guy in the suit who was more confident. All right, so the elements. So this is what you need to know before you actually do anything coming to writing. You need to know the who. And the who is all about your audience. Who are you writing your speech for? Are you writing the speech for the minister? Are you writing the speech for your book club? Or are you writing the speech for your class, for your teacher? Okay. What you also need to focus on, and this one is very important, this one we'll also look at in detail, is the what. The what refers to what your speech is going to be about. This is the topic, and you need to spend a lot of time on this part of the speech, because when you have a great speech, it makes it very easy to present, and it helps you to become confident in your presentation. And you need to know why. Answer the question why, and the question of why is all about purpose. What is the purpose of your speech? Are you going to get a mark? Are you going to present that informal speech to your parents so you can actually get your way and have that new Xbox, or be able to hang out with your friends, or just win an argument? Okay. And the how as well. How long it needs to be in terms of time. So this is where practice becomes very important, because you can write a speech, but when you haven't practiced it, you won't know how long it is. So you need to find out this: how long does my speech have to be? How long do I have? Is it 3 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? And when you practice, when you've written and you've completed and you've edited your speech and it's in front of you, and you're probably in front of a mirror, or you're now in front of an audience that you're practicing with, you time yourself so that you can actually meet that time limit that will be given to you. Informal speeches, you might not have a time limit like you will when you have a formal one, like when you have to stand in front of your class and give an oral speech. Okay, so now let's focus on the what part for a moment. Okay, so the what part is the topic. So you need to know what is the topic and do you have options? You might be given different topics that you can pick from. Make sure that you pick something that you are comfortable with, something that you like, because this makes it easier for you to write, to research, and to speak about something you generally like. But in case you don't have that option, in case you're given topics that you're not comfortable with and maybe you don't like them so much, what you can do is make sure that you research. I cannot emphasize this enough. You need to make sure you know what you're talking about because you are most likely to stand in front of people and need to convince them of what you're saying. And this needs to show when you're speaking that you actually know what you're talking about, which makes the next step very important, the planning. The planning of your speech will help you with the final product. Most people are comfortable with the mind map, and this usually means taking a piece of paper, drawing a little round thing in the middle, and having different arrows and jotting down ideas. Okay, so this is just a rough sketch of ideas. So most people like having the word introduction, body, and conclusion. So this is what you'd like to do. So this is your game plan. This is what you are planning to execute. Okay, so when you've done your research and when you've planned, and now you have everything and you have to write, make use of short sentences. Keep it short and simple. If you remember from Chimamanda's speech, you will realize that her sentences were short. There was one where she said, I was 19 years old. That's it. Short, simple sentences. She keeps it simple. Stay away from using big words that you're unfamiliar with, that you might struggle pronouncing. Keep it simple, short, simple, concise. What you also need to do is what Chimamanda also did. Write in a conversational manner. Don't write like you are reading a book or you are reading, I don't know. Just don't write in that way. Like I said, short, simple, concise is the way to go. Okay, and now let's have a look at different types of sentences. Remember, this is just a bit of revision of sentences so you know what kind of sentences to write when you're writing that speech. So this is a bit of revision. Simple sentences. So there are three types of sentences. We have simple, we have compound, and we have complex sentences. So it's just know the elements that go into the sentences. Keep them in mind when you're writing your speech. The first one is simple sentences. And a simple sentence is a basic sentence that expresses a complete thought. And it contains three things. It contains a subject and it contains a verb. A subject, that is the who and the sentence, and sometimes the what. And a verb is the doing word. It's the action word. Okay, so here are two examples of a simple sentence. The train was late. And what is our subject? Our subject there is the train. And was is our verb. And late, it follows a complete thought. Okay. And the next one is Mary and Maggie took the bus. The verb there is took. Our subject is Mary and Maggie. And our object is the bus. Right, now we're looking at compound sentences. A compound sentence contains two main clauses joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon. What you also need to know about compound sentences is they connect two simple sentences, but they often do not show a clear relationship between the two parts. Okay, so here is our comma in this example. I waited for the bus, comma, but it was late. So let's look at the first part before the comma. It says, I waited for the bus, That first part is a complete thought on its own. It makes sense. Okay? So it's a simple sentence. The second part, but it was late. It was late is another complete sentence on its own. So our conjunction there, our coordinating conjunction there is the word but. So examples of coordinating conjunctions: but, and, or, yet, no, or. So those are just a few examples. So you can just take a moment right now and think of examples of compound sentences. So I'm just going to give you a moment so you can just jot them down and think about simple and compound sentences. So write 2 examples of simple sentences and write 2 examples of compound sentences. So I'm just going to give you a moment while you do that. Okay, let's continue with our third type of sentence, complex sentences. Complex sentences contains a main clause and or more dependent clause. Okay, if the dependent clause comes before the independent clause, add a comma after the dependent clause. If the main clause comes first, the comma is needed between the two. Okay, that seems a bit complicated, but let's just break it down for a moment. An independent clause and the main clause are the same thing. So what we refer that to is a sentence that can stand on its own and it makes sense. So if you did not continue, that would make sense. So dependent clause, main clause, think of simple sentences. Okay, a dependent clause is one where it cannot make sense on its own. All right, so it needs the main idea or the simple sentence. Let's just have a look at complex sentences can show a more specific relationship between the two parts, between the part of the sentence and a compound sentence. Complex sentences examples. This is one with an independent clause first. Okay, we won the game. Remember what I said about independent clause first? Think about what I said. They can stand on their own. We worked together as a team. Okay, all right, so for this one, the dependent clause comes first and it is followed by a comma. Although I broke my arm, I still cheered for my team from the sidelines. Okay, so the dependent clause there, although I broke my arm, that leaves you with a question mark if the rest of the sentence does not follow. So it does not make sense. So this is the dependent clause. In the second part, I still cheered for my team from the sidelines. See, that sentence can stand on its own. It's the main idea. Remember, if you have any questions so far or by the end of the lesson, you'll see my email address at the end of class and you can take it down and email me your questions. It can be about speech writing. It can be about what we're talking about Chimamanda's speech. You are more than welcome to contact me. As we continue with writing a good speech, you need to use concrete words and examples. Okay, so you need to use concrete examples. So if you think back to Chimamanda's speech, she used the example of the houseboy, that she came from a pretty comfortable or well-off family and they had a houseboy that was from the village, and the houseboy, her mom always told her that they were poor. So she was surprised when they went to the village and found that that's not the only thing that they are. Remember, the speech is about the danger of a single story. So the point she's making there is that we need to be careful of what we take in. what we absorb, what we know, because there's more than that. What comes to mind is the phrase, there's more than one side to a story. So it's the same thing. With the example of Fide, there was more than one side to that story. So she used those examples. She used more than one. She used the one about how she used to read British and American novels with people that ate apples and that had snow, which I think she never experienced. Okay. The next point is just an emphasis of what I've said before. Get your facts straight. I cannot emphasize this enough. Get your facts straight. Do your research, plan properly. And when you do your research, look at more than one source. Make sure that what you're saying is not just from one place, that you can back it up, that this is an article, this is an academic journal, and this is from somebody who's credible. Okay. So when you've done all of those things and you've written your speech and you have your first draft, read, edit, 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 edit. So when you edit, this is what you'll be looking for. You'll be looking for the type of sentences that you have. You'll be looking for spelling mistake. You'll be looking for words that are stronger, are better than the ones that you have. And for this one, you can use a thesaurus. You can look for synonyms. So instead of just saying look, you can say she was walking and they were staring. Instead of just saying they were walking, you might just say they were strolling. So it really strengthens what you're trying to say when you use words like that. And the last thing that you need to look at is practice. It is important that you practice, like I said, that it will make you more confident. And you might actually volunteer to go first because you are now more confident in your presentation. All right, that is it for today's class. Thank you so much for coming to the lesson. If you have any questions about how to write a speech, anything you're not sure about, if you have questions about your orals, coming exams, please email me on this email address. I am Ms. Gasa, and my email address is gasazama@yahoo.com. It was lovely sharing with you the information about speech writing. I do hope to see you soon.